Until science makes it possible to live forever, everyone you know, including yourself, will die. Death could come at any moment, and it's a pretty scary thing to think about. So staying on this morbid topic, today I'm going to dive into what happens to a person's money when they die. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Reese, and in today's video, I am really sorry in advance if this is depressing, but I wanted to get a better understanding of what would happen to my money if I were to pass away. If you have reached the point in your life where you have started to earn income, that money is probably being stored in various locations. Let's zoom out and use me as an example. I have money stored in lots of different locations. I have bank accounts, I have cryptocurrency, I have a business which has its own set of accounts, I have shares, I have a retirement fund growing in superannuation, I have insurances, I have personal belongings and assets which are worth money and appreciating every single year. All of these tied together build my net worth, which at this point in my life is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and as I get older, that will continue to grow. So if I were to unfortunately pass away, where would the money go from each of these individual locations? And just one quick thing to mention is that I'm going to use the word estate throughout this video. Estate, in context of this video, it means all of the person's assets, money, and belongings at their time of death. So let's start right at the top with what's most likely the most common answer, which is someone's will, W-I-L-L, will. A will is a legal document which coordinates the distribution of a person's assets once they pass away. It lets the creator of that will communicate their wishes about where and how their money should be distributed once they've died. Wills are pretty handy to have because they give people peace of mind knowing that their wealth, the money, the hard-earned cash that they have spent their life building can be distributed to the people that they want it to be distributed to. Meaning it could go to loved ones, it could go to family, it could go to friends, organizations, charities, you name it, you get to set those terms. And when you die, I mean, you're dead. You're not really having to worry about it. You get to worry about it beforehand, but you get to make those decisions before that time comes. Okay, so let's now dive into the specifics. What happens to your bank accounts when a person passes away? The banks will be notified that the person has passed away. Cool. What they will then do is close the account and transfer the funds either to the next of kin, to whoever the will had outlined the person be the receiver of that money, or to the estate. And the estate is managed by an executor, which is generally a family member. If my parents were to pass away, myself and my sister, being the only two children, would become the executors of their estate. My parents, I don't believe, have a will. Therefore, my sister and I would be the executors of that estate. I'm going to use executor a little bit in this video as well. I thought I should clear that up. So with your bank accounts, the money gets transferred either to the next of kin, the will, inheritors, or the estate. Okay, next up is cryptocurrency. And this one is a little bit more interesting because it's so new and it's not really regulated yet. Within Australia in particular, the way that I looked it up and from what I understand, you would have two options here. The first would be I hold a lot of cryptocurrency. So if I were to pass away, I would want my family members to be able to access those accounts. So what I've done is I've left clear instructions somewhere. It would be pretty difficult to get into, but I've left instructions somewhere. It could be within a will or it could be with someone you trust, giving them that access to be able to get into your balance or your exchange and transfer the funds out to their own exchange when the time comes. Whatever the scenario that they were required to do that played out. The other option here as well is something I had to look up because I wasn't sure if this was a thing or not. Exchanges actually will work with people depending on the scenario again, where if they can prove that this family member has died and they are the people to inherit that money, etc., the exchanges will work with people to retrieve those funds as well, which is nice to know, but I would say it would be very vigorous and a very lengthy process because of how secure these types of exchanges try to be and how much money there is to lose through these exchanges. So I'm sure exchanges would vet people correctly, but there is a way to go through that method if someone were to die to retrieve those funds. Next up is shares. Shares are a little bit more interesting again because these are regulated and it's an investment investment class. So the way generally shares would get handled is that if I were to die, my shares would either be sold off or transferred through the administration process via my will. Will is going to come up every single scenario. If I have one, that's where that money would go, or it would get fed into the estate where it would be added to that pool of money and then distributed by the executor at the time that happened. It's pretty simple in terms of how it would go about happening. It would probably be a little bit more complex when it actually came to fulfilling that process. And that's not only for Australia. I would say that is very similar amongst other countries, and there are so many different countries with so many different exchanges for investing into shares. So yeah, keep that in mind as well. This would be pretty common grounds anywhere you are in the world. Another kind of different one, again, is my insurances as well as my superannuation fund, which is my retirement fund. In America, that would be a 401k. In this scenario, these two balances would go to my beneficiaries. When I set up my insurances and I set up my superannuation, I get to name a beneficiary, meaning that's where those funds will go. Currently, it's a family member. That's what it's set to. And if I were to get married, it would probably change depending on the scenario that I'm in. The point here is that generally people will set a beneficiary and that's who it will go to. The will in this scenario, unless you specifically say whoever's in my will, it's going to go to those beneficiaries. If there's no beneficiary set, it would feed into the estate. Executor would distribute the funds. You see where we're kind of going in this pattern here. It's will, executor as part of the estate, depending on the scenario. And if it's no one, it would still go to an executor where it would be managed by a government entity essentially. And that money again would be distributed appropriately. Another interesting one is your personal belongings and personal items. So the first point of call to where these things would go if you were to pass away would be your heirs. So if you had kids or a wife or a de facto partner, they would generally inherit your personal belongings. I personally have probably around $100,000 worth of personal assets if I were to add it all up and if I were to sell it off all right now, which is a significant amount of money if you really think about it. Knowing that it would go to my family unless I wrote a will and specified it to go somewhere else, kind of comforting to know. As someone who doesn't have kids or I'm not married yet, it would probably go to my direct family, being my sister, my parents, the closest family I have. And it would just move its way down the ranks. If you didn't have siblings or parents anymore, you didn't have kids, you didn't have a partner, it would just continuously branch out to family, where in the worst case scenario, you've literally got no one, all of it would go to an estate. Now, property, as someone who has a house, this again, I caught my interest. The first place it would go is your will, and then the second place is the estate. In simple terms, the transfer of the title and the process to go through that would be a little bit more complex, but in simple terms, that's how it would go about happening. And now the most complex on the list. If you are the director of a PTY Ltd company or PTY Limited company, as in the CEO, the sole owner, the largest shareholder, what's going to happen to that company? What's going to happen to the money within that company? I am the prime example here. I own 100% of the company that my YouTube channel runs through. All of the funds that are generated through this channel fall into the bank accounts associated with this company. If I were to die, where would that money go? Well, firstly, the administrator or executor of my estate would be able to appoint a new director if it was the type of business that could keep running, or it had shareholders where the new director could then either dismantle the company and give the shareholders their value that they are owed based on what they had invested, or they can run the company until a new director is appointed by the board if I wasn't the sole owner of the company. But in my instance, I'm the 100% owner. So the executor could either do one of two things. That is, appoint a new director to continue my YouTube channel where you wouldn't see me, you'd see someone else, and it would just continue flowing on that way. The more likely scenario to happen would be the company would be wound down, the funds would be dispersed into the estate to the people throughout my will, wherever I've said I want that money to go if I passed away, and ultimately the company would cease to exist, which is kind of sad, but that's the scenario that would happen. It's really complicated when you get into companies. I don't think it would be applicable to many people, but I thought it was pretty interesting to look into nonetheless. And I just wanted to tack this onto the end after mentioning all these topics to just remind you that if the person who dies has no beneficiaries, then the estate will be awarded to the next closest living relatives, whether it be cousins, second cousins. They will just go down the family tree until they find someone who technically gets to inherit money because of that family bloodline. And finally, what happens to your debt when you pass away? From my understanding, your debt will generally get paid off with money that pools into the estate. So the estate, all your stuff gets sold, gets funneled into this pool of money where the executor's managing it. What they will have to do is pay off any debts before that money can be distributed to your beneficiaries. Examples of the types of debt that would be expected to be paid off would be things like credit card debt, it'd be a home loan, potentially personal loans, a car loan, things like that. Just understand that, debt doesn't just disappear because you pass away. The other thing to understand here as well that's incredibly important is that debt generally won't be inherited by people that you might have in your will, your beneficiaries. Debt isn't generally inherited. The only circumstances where that would occur is if you were someone who had a credit card and you had another person's name on that credit card as well. So it could be like a family credit card. Then they would inherit that debt. The same goes for a home loan. If it's two people on a home loan, one person dies, then the other person will be expected to service that loan. Generally, the majority of people will create a will once they either get married or have kids. I, being someone who's in my late 20s, definitely hasn't even really thought about doing it just yet, but I'm sure in the near future it will become a topic that I need to cover. I might make a video about it when that time does come. So younger people, generally it's not worth them doing it because they either don't have much to give away or their closest relatives are going to be their parents or siblings. Now, this was just a brief snapshot and overview of what you could expect to see happen to your money and your various accounts in the instance where you were to unfortunately pass away. For me, it was particularly insightful regarding cryptocurrency and my PTY Limited company because I didn't have a good understanding of what would happen to those entities if I were to pass away. So now I do, which kind of gave me some clarity, which I'm really happy about. Overall, I hope you learned something in today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did learn something, please hit that like and subscribe button down below. I really do appreciate the support. Make sure bell notifications are turned on. And as always, I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.